Hey, this is Joanne Ecton, and welcome to our next installment of Facebook Live. And as you know, every other month we meet here on Facebook instead of one of our face-to-face events so that we can talk with you about concerns that you've brought to us, questions that are burning in your mind, and try to help you with career advice. And so today we have a pretty cool discussion topic. We're going to talk about how do you ask for a raise or a promotion. And I have with me two really super HR professionals. I think between the two of you, you've worked in 10 different companies and so all different sizes, shapes, industries. So we have Sigrid Bierman and Armando Lopez, and thank you guys both for being here. If you don't mind, would you give just a quick intro of who you are and a little bit about your background just to warm up and let everybody know who you are? Because I'm sure I didn't do it justice. So I'll go ladies first.
I am Sigrid. I have been in HR for over 20 years in a variety of industries and backgrounds. My most recent position is as an HR business partner with a large firm here in Nashville. And I have worked in a variety of roles within the HR field as well. So I come with a lot of exposure to a lot of different areas. So my T is long and deep. So
very cool.
So would it be showing my age if I said it's been a little longer than that?
I know. I don't go over 20. I stop at 20. Okay. That's where I'll always be.
So Armando Lopez has been in human resources, mostly in the hospitality industry. So the bulk of my career is in the hospitality industry. Currently with Ramsey Solutions and 28 years of human resource experience in all the different segments thereof.
So they say that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert, so both of you guys qualify.
Okay. I was thinking we're getting close. Yeah.
Getting close, at least. All right, so let's just kind of jump right into the topic. The big question that we hear often is, how do you ask for a raise? If you feel like you deserve a raise or a promotion, how do you do that? How do you ask for it? So what would be your advice to someone who's looking for some recognition in terms of raise or promotion?
Well, you didn't like my answer earlier when I said just don't.
Well, don't, but there's no. See, I changed it somewhere. Now I'm saying,
okay.
So how do you feel like you get some recognition, whether it's raise, promotion, what have you?
Go ahead.
So really, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and there's a lot of different reasons to do it. And I'm not sure how you feel, but typically your personal situation does not play into a raise. And so someone that says, I just bought a yacht and I need to make more money to pay for it, that's not well received. And so those conversations, in my opinion, happen over time. It's not a singular conversation, although it could be. It could begin with a singular conversation. But approaching a leader expecting an answer on the spot when you say, I deserve a raise or I am expecting a raise and expecting the answer to happen right then has not been my experience.
Yeah, mine either. I think that when people come to me and they ask me about how do I get a promotion or how do I get a raise, one of the questions I come back to them is why? Why are you asking me this? And to your point, I think if it's, because I can't afford my rent or I really need to make more money because I'm going to buy this yacht, that's not an answer that's going to resonate with the business. So you really need to ask yourself, is it because my friends just got a raise? Is it because I feel like I need to be further along in my career because that's what everyone's telling me? Or is it that I really feel capable of doing more? I'm able to take on more responsibility and I'm starting to feel like I'm stagnating in my current role. Is it because I've been doing some research and I'm finding that I'm below market in my role? I've gained this experience, I've gone and gotten this certification, and with all of this I feel as though I'm underpaid for the position I'm currently in. So you really need to ask yourself, why am I looking at this? Is it because I feel like it's expected of me? That's not the answer to go forward. But if you feel like from a more analytical, logical perspective, it's because I'm underpaid or I'm capable more, I'm able to move forward in my career more, that's the answer. That if it's one of those, then you go to the next step. But if it's more the emotional reason or it's the everybody saying this, then I would say at this point, don't worry about it. If you're happy where you're at, you're content with what you're doing, and you're excited to go into work, then I think you're good. Then I would say, don't let other people pressure you into saying this is what you need to do.
So let's break it down for a minute. So a couple of questions. So I'm an employee, I've been working for somebody for a couple of years, and I feel like I've developed my skills to the point where I'm very competent at this job. But I want more, right? And more may be that so there's this concept of, and this is what I'm trying to get to, do I feel like I deserve more money because my skills have improved since you hired me, or do I deserve more money because I'm capable of more, which is what you alluded to? There's a difference, right, of where you are in that spectrum. So really, what should I be looking at to state my case?
The best conversations I've had with people about increases are when it's not the capacity. It's not I'm capable of doing more, but I'm actually doing more. You hired me to support 2 people, and the company has grown, and I'm now supporting 6 people. Right. And it's still me, and I've grown my capabilities and my efficiencies to be able to take care of those 6 people efficiently. I've acquired new skills. I've done things to help me be able to do that I'm already doing. Great book out there. I'll save you the $9.95 and give you what's really in the book, and that is Becoming the Obvious Choice. And it really talks about behaving for the position you want to be in. And for a raise, it's almost identical. You have to be effective first. You have to add value first before the raise happens in most cases. Back to your question of capacity. I've grown my capacity and I'm capable of doing more, but I'm not doing it. It's almost like, why aren't you doing it today?
Or is that becomes a conversation about shifting to another role where perhaps you might get to use that capacity?
And I agree. I think that when you go into I'm capable of more, that's more I need a change in my role. I need additional responsibilities. Whereas I should be earning more money is after you've already taken on those responsibilities. Anytime you can quantify and show these are the responsibilities taken on, these are the accomplishments that I've had, numbers, CFOs always love numbers. So any kind of numbers you can show, do that. And any kind of research you can bring to the table as well helps. I read something interesting that says that if you bring a specific dollar amount to the table, it's easier for someone to accept that than if you bring a range. And so as women, oftentimes we're a little bit more range focused. And really, if you're looking to ask for something, do your due diligence, do your work, look for market data, ask around, go to professional organizations and reach out and see what the market norm is and see if you're in that. And if you're not, then ask for a specific dollar amount. So don't say between 50 and 60, say 53.5. That's what I'm looking for. And so give a specific number. And so I think that taking on more, showing your value, showing you're committed to the organization, those are all key points in getting you to that next place.
I agree. You also have to make sure what you're asking for is reasonable. And you talked about the market research, and there are so many ways of doing that now. And some of them give you those broad ranges. So where do you put yourself in that broad range, and why?
Yeah, some of them are great and some of them are not so great. I mean, some of them you look up and you're like, I should be making $100,000 more a year than I currently am. And it's not accurate. Right. It's not an accurate reflection. So you really do need to go and look. Again, you've got to go a little bit deeper. It's a little bit more legwork. It's work to find this information, but ultimately it's preparation to help you be a little bit more successful. Right. So I agree. There's a lot of places to go. They give you ranges, but you've got to get a little bit more specific.
Can you recommend any sources that you feel are more reliable, more accurate?
So there's really 2 forms of pay data available. One is fed by the individual, so it's a consumer-fed data, and the other one is fed by companies, and that's things like the Department of Labor, Labor Bureau of Labor Statistics. One is so accurate, but to try to drill down, it's not very user-friendly. As you can imagine, Bureau of Labor Statistics doesn't even sound friendly. So that one's going to be much harder to drill down and really be able to pinpoint where you are and what you should be asking for. For salary.com, payscale.com, Glassdoor, all of those other sites are easier to use, but they're also not necessarily as accurate in most cases.
Yeah. I also find, again, professional organizations. So, Women Get It, going and networking with folks and finding out what are you seeing in the marketplace, connecting, if you have any friends that are recruiters, connecting with them and asking them for some feedback about Nashville specifically, talking to others that you know in other businesses, what are they seeing? And again, you don't want to put your friend on a spot and say, what's your salary? But, ask them what kinds of wages and earnings they're seeing. Even in HR, we periodically will do that. I was recruiting for a role and I thought it might have been a purple unicorn. And so I went out to just folks I met on LinkedIn and I reached out to them and said, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find out if this pay range is what the norm is. Can you help me? And they were all very willing to work with me on that. So sometimes if you network and just make connections within the market, you'll be able to find some of that information. And I hate to say this, but job postings, sometimes when you go out and you see jobs, they'll have the range posted, what they're looking for.
Yeah. But just yet another reason to be networking and building a network while you're still in your job and not when you're looking for your next one.
Correct.
Right. Yes. Absolutely.
Which is what we see all the time.
Best time to find a job is when you have a job.
Yeah. Exactly right. But that's one of my pet peeves, so I have to get that. So basically, there's a bunch of work that you need to do as an individual, right? To really look objectively at what your contributions are, what your growth has been, what other salary ranges you're seeing out there in the marketplace, to take a look at, are you being reasonable in this request, right? So then what's the first step? Is it reaching out to your HR business partner? Is it reaching out to your manager? Where do you go first to have this conversation?
Most people would think HR is the first place, but really it's not. Your leader is the first place. Absolutely. If your leader's not behind you getting more money or promoted, it's just not going to happen. Right. And so your leader has to be supportive of the conversation. They have to believe in you and that you bring more value in order for that to take place. I don't know of any company, and I've worked for two of them very large, that HR prompted the increase. Right. Now, market analysis may cause some rectifying, and that may come from HR, but not the individual person.
Okay. And I would say it's really dependent on your environment. And if you need HR as a sounding board, especially if you're in a smaller organization and you're looking to see how this is going to be received or how can I approach this manager, I think you should feel free to utilize your HR representative to talk to them to just get some feedback. But ultimately, yes, your line manager is the person that you need to be able to work with. That's the individual that is going to be making the recommendation and sometimes fighting the fight.
And you said it was a process, right? So that first conversation with your line manager, you initiate, you have this conversation with this data you've got. So how do you typically see that evolving? I mean, it's never just a one and done conversation, very rarely.
Right. So earlier when we were joking about how do you ask for a raise, you really hit it. What can I do to add more value? Here's what I've already done. Are there any recommendations that you as my leader, what else could I be doing? Because those conversations don't sound like I'm asking for more money.
Right.
And yet what I'm really doing is I'm asking for more responsibility, better ways to contribute that will lead to a conversation about, is what I'm doing now, how do I get promoted or how do I get an increase? That's a much easier transition when you've already had the conversation about the value you're bringing and how you could bring additional value.
I think, too, that sometimes we forget that managers are people, too. And, they need assistance. They've got a lot going on. They've got things that they're trying to manage. And oftentimes, if you bring them more work, they're going to be a little bit more resistant to take that on. So if you can bring them things that make their world easier, I'm willing to take on this, or I saw a gap in this the other day, and I thought maybe I could do such and such, and then that would streamline it and it would make it so much easier. I mean, if you bring this to your manager, they're going to be able to embrace it more. They'll be able to move things forward more. It'll be easier on them. Part of the process too that I want to bring up is that, we all have to do our end of year reviews, and we have our self-evaluations that we need to complete. And I have seen so many people just scribble through that in seconds and then just check it off their list. I got it done. Mm-hmm. That's a great place for you to start selling yourself and talking about your accomplishments and making it easier for your line manager. Your line manager isn't going to know everything that you've done. And they may be like, oh yeah, I remember that Sig did this and she was great at that. But if you can lay it out for that individual, he or she is going to be able to then go to the meetings where they're talking about compensation and increases and raises and bonuses and say, wow, look what Sig did. She laid out all of this information. Oh, I forgot about that. Oh, that was a little bit more critical than I remembered. Yes, that's right. They're going to be able to utilize that to help support you. So don't just scribble scrabble it. Actually take a little time and thought. And I get it. It's easier to say that than do it. I sometimes scribble scrabble too. I get it, but that's a place to go because that's a step in the process. It's a way of showing yourself off.
And so to your point, leaders oftentimes, me included, do a horrible job of keeping up with things through the year.
Right.
And so you as a team member should be keeping up with that. What did you do in January that we're not going to talk about till next year in January?
Right.
Because we're all recency, right? Mm-hmm, so what have you done for me lately? Yeah. What's the last thing you've done well? What's the last thing you've done poorly? And there's the eval, where we forget about what happened in January and February and March.
Right.
Just another argument for ongoing one-on-one conversations with your leader throughout the year and documenting those things as they happen.
Yeah.
And requesting those. Managers can get caught up in things. They can cancel. They can forget. And so requesting one-on-ones for your own personal development, again, that's a step towards promotion, towards increases, is requesting feedback. And again, sometimes people ask for feedback. And when they receive it, they say things like, no, you're wrong.
Right.
And so instead of going into it like that, you need to really be open to hear what people are going to say. And so if your manager says to you, well, Sig, I think blah, 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 you've got to be open and receptive to hearing that. And if you disagree, don't automatically disagree. Take some time. Think about it. Be a little introspective and look at yourself, because again, that's going to help you grow in development. That may be your manager helping you to your next level of business acumen, and that's what's going to take you to the next level.
So just to that line of conversation, do you see a difference in the genders and how they approach this and how they might approach the conversation, the difference in behavior of what a woman might do versus a man in terms of, their presentation, their approach to their line manager, how prepared they are? What do you see along those lines?
I see a difference. Do you see a difference?
I do.
Judging from the look on your face, you've got something to say.
Well, that's just because I've made mistakes, right? Yeah. And so what I have learned, and you guys can correct me, early in my career I made a mistake, and when someone came in to ask for a raise, and it happened to be a woman, I really just treated them the way I would expect to be treated, and was completely candid and just basically said no, not realizing what it took for that person to walk in the office to say that, and how prepared they were, and how emotionally connected and how personally connected they were to that conversation. This was a personal affront to them when I just said no and dismissed it quickly, which is what I would have expected somebody to do for me. If you're going to say no, then just say no and I'm done and we can move on, right? It's not personal. It's just you don't have the money. But this was very personal. This was very tied to who they were and how they did things. And it was something that has stuck with me. And I try to understand now, male or female, what's behind this? What did it take for you to walk in here and make this request? How much energy have you put behind it? Male or female. Right. What I've learned is to seek to ask questions, because it will help me then not be dismissive, and give them the attention that it deserves.
Yeah. I once had a friend who is male tell me, you never leave money on the table. You always ask for more money. And that was his philosophy, and he always did. And he reaped the benefit of that. But I feel as though some of the gender bias that is still in today's world, that women don't always take that kind of more assertive stance. And so I think that as a female, when I've seen females come in, we use more softening statements with what we say. And again, this is a generalization. Not all women are like this. Not all men are aggressive in their approach. I mean, this is a generalization. But I find that sometimes females have a tendency to be like, well, I think, I believe, I'm hoping, and it's a little bit softer. Whereas I think that when you go in, you do your research, make sure that you feel confident with where you're at and with your numbers, have backup information behind it. And if you have that, you're going to feel more confident as you approach someone. It's hard, all right? It's hard. No one wants to go into their boss's office and say, I'm underpaid, or, you know what, I'm doing all of these things and I deserve this additional role or this additional title. It's hard. But if you feel confident with yourself, you can go in, you can approach. And so I would say, don't feel insecure. Don't feel like you need to do softening statements. Don't overcompensate and be super assertive and aggressive when you go in and say, I need this or I'm quitting. That's probably not the approach to take either. And practice. Do your research, and then it's okay to practice. All of us do that when we have roles that we're in. Even in HR, if we're preparing for a difficult conversation, we outline that conversation. We prepare ourselves for what may come up in that conversation. So prepare yourself and practice. And if you have a friend that you trust, have them sit behind a desk, and then you deliver your message. And I think that as you practice that and you do that more, then you're going to find that you're better at it.
So I have 1,000 more questions I'll ask you guys, but let me just take a pause for a moment and talk to the folks who are watching on social media. If you have a question, please and looking for your questions. So we want to make sure that we get your questions as well. So please post them in social media while we continue this conversation. Okay?
Earlier, Sig, you were saying don't walk in too assertive. Don't be too overconfident. The worst conversations I've had with people about an increase is when it was stated or not stated, but implied, one or the other, or else.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Right. It's I need a raise or else.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that never ends well for either side. But
yeah.
In other words, leave a way out. If I don't get a raise, then what? Well, I'm not ready to quit my job over it. Okay, well then make sure we state that.
Sure.
Make sure we state, hey, I'd like a raise, but if I don't get it, and oh, by the way, here's my justification, here's my preparation, here's all the things I have. But if it doesn't happen, then how can you help me make sure it happens within a reasonable amount of time? What else could I be doing? What else could I be learning? How else could I be adding value?
Have a list of questions. Questions are always good.
Do you see a difference when, like I said, you guys have some pretty extensive background in different companies. Do you see a difference in small companies versus larger companies and how this process is handled, and whether it's, something that happens as a big annual event, or maybe it's an ongoing process throughout the year? And you mentioned budget, right? What can I afford? So that plays into it as well. So what kind of differences do you see?
So smaller companies, you tend to wear a bunch of different hats. And so you can't really benchmark as quickly and say, hey, here's what I'm worth. Because in a small company, you're doing a little bit of everything, and we just don't have that specialization. And for those companies, it goes back to added value to the organization. And it becomes more conversational. Typically in a small company, you're talking to the person that's going to make the decision. There's one person. Right, the owner of that company, the CEO of that company, you're speaking with the decision maker. This isn't going to go any further. And so that person typically will answer it either on the fly or very shortly thereafter. Let me think about it, and the answer is yes or the answer is no, and it's a very quick, And in many cases, and I don't mean this the wrong way as in don't prepare, but what other companies are doing becomes less relevant in a small organization. Sure. We're not that organization, and we're not that big, or we're not that. It almost puts that person in a role of saying, yeah, but we're not them. Right? Like, that's why I left those big companies, because I wanted to work for a small company. Right. And so that's the big difference there.
I find that in a small company, you have more flexibility with timing. So if you came mid-year or there was a change, they were a little bit more open and receptive, but usually the budget was a little bit tighter. I once had a CEO tell me that it's easier when you're not making money because the answer is always no. So if you're in a company that's a startup and you're trying to get your feet off the ground, then you're all in it together, and that's it. The perk is there's flexibility, but there's usually less money. But when you're in a larger organization, oftentimes the timing is much more structured. And unless the company is open to having off-cycle increases, then odds are it won't happen during that period. And so again, timing is something you need to be aware of and look at to determine what makes the most sense when you go and ask, when you start having these conversations.
Their positions are only worth so much, and people don't like to hear this, but at some point you have to choose. I can stay as an individual contributor, and there is a maximum to what I'm going to be able to earn. I can stay as a manager of a department of 2, and there is a maximum to what I'm going to be able to earn. And so at some point I have to be willing to do more or different. Right. If I'm an individual contributor, at some point to get more, I may need to move into managing people, but I don't want to manage people. Okay. Then at some point you've reached that maximum for that area.
I think something that I'd like folks to know too is that your value as a person is not judged by your salary. And so when people talk to you about money and wage and earnings, that's not you as a person. That's not your value. That's the position and what the position is worth to the organization, along with the organization's philosophy. Some companies I've worked in, we've had roles that were so critical, we were willing to pay 90% of market, which means we wanted to be the leader in the market for this one role. But other positions, maybe we were willing to pay 30%, and we weren't even midpoint. And so that was our philosophy. That's what we embraced. That's what we wanted to move forward. It didn't mean that anyone was less valuable as a person or as an employee or as an associate. It was just that was the company's philosophy. So again, even though it's personal, you sometimes have to try to remove that piece from it.
That's probably the hardest conversation to have with someone. It's not you, it's that role, and we've benchmarked that role to this amount. And then when asked why, the sad truth behind it is it becomes a supply and demand issue.
Oftentimes, yes.
And so the better the supply to fill that role, if you have tons of resume flow for that type of role, you could still choose to be at midpoint or a little above if you want the top. But when you have no flow whatsoever, you're forced to pay more typically. You're forced to go above.
Something else to consider as well is if you are someone that you're at the top of your pay band, you aren't interested in expanding your responsibilities, you're held a little bit more where you are. Maybe there are some additional perks that you can always ask for. Again, a little bit more lenient in smaller companies than larger ones, but additional vacation time or maybe a training that you're interested in going to that's a little bit more expensive and might put a little bit more weight on the budget. You can ask for those kinds of things. So don't always get caught up in, I have to have more money, or I have to have a different title, or I have to, sometimes there are other things that can enrich your role, becoming a mentor. If you're a senior on the team and you don't want to leave that team, maybe helping train other people. You can add value, you can enrich your role, you can increase your engagement in different ways. It doesn't have to just be those two things. Sure. So expand your thinking.
Okay, great. Do we have any questions coming in from social media?
So one question that we have is, what's next if they say no? What do you do next?
So if you ask for a raise and they say no, what do you do?
It's how can I? right? So that is the question, by the way, for that leader. So what's next? Mm-hmm. Right? Are you saying no, not ever? Are you saying no, not this role? Are you saying no, not me? And so typically it's not a no, not you. It's okay, for us to be able to do this, there are certain things that have to be true as well. So the company's revenue has to go up. Mm-hmm. The marketplace has to change. You would have to take on more responsibility. You would have to pick up new skills. The question of what's next is the question to pose. Mm-hmm. So what's next, right? If not now, and I understand it, then what's next? How could I add more value? When could we have this conversation again? What could I do differently? That's the questions behind it.
Yeah, definitely don't slam your fist on the table when they say no. Definitely don't do that. That's bad. I would say, if you need time to digest it a little bit more, feel free to say, wow, okay, I'm a little disappointed, but I'm still very committed to this organization. I love my role. I love working with the team that I've got. I mean, granted, all these things are true, right? And then say, but I need a little bit of time to think about this and then know what next steps are. And so I think being open like that is something that's totally acceptable. I also think saying, you know what, I understand that you can't offer me whatever it is you're looking for, but I am interested in progressing. So can we have more conversations around this? And usually line managers, your manager, they're totally open to that when you approach it in a professional and mature way, showing them that I understand the business. I understand this was a business decision. It wasn't personal, but how can we move forward? I think that if you take it in that kind of manner, it's usually really well received. Yep. It still stinks. I mean, you didn't get what you wanted, but I think it puts you on the right path to eventually get to where you want to be.
And it is an ongoing conversation. It's not that
it really
singular
is.
Conversation.
It really is.
Okay.
Another question is, we've been talking a lot about you're already in a job and asking for a raise, but what do you do when you're trying to negotiate salary, getting a new position? Does that strategy change?
No, the research should still be there. So you should know what that position's worth, and so you should do all of your research. There's different companies that have different philosophies for how they're going to pay. And I currently work for a company that is all about cash payments and budgeting. And so I've taken this approach, maybe wrongfully, but I've taken this approach of almost saying to someone up front, if you'd like to feel like you won this negotiation and you want to have a negotiation, then let me know, because I'll extend you an offer and keep some in my pocket I can give you back later. But I really have a maximum that I can only go to. Mm-hmm. And so I can give you all of it at once, but then you're going to be disappointed if you're expecting a conversation and negotiation. Mm-hmm. You're going to be disappointed in the end. And so if you'd rather feel like you negotiated a great deal, then I'll keep some back.
Yeah.
And we can go that route.
And I would say, yes, your approach does change, because you're not saying I can take on more. The best you can do is present yourself in the interview process, showing your skills. But oftentimes when you're getting an offer, you're excited about the role, you want to take the position. So I would say don't go low. Don't sell yourself short. Be confident and say what you really want. And I would say don't play games, because I've seen people get cut out because of that, because they were like, well, I want $1 million. And then the person's like, well, we can't even come close to that. Okay, they're no longer a serious candidate. So I would say go with what you think is reasonable. Go with what you want and what will make you happy and keep you satisfied. Don't sell yourself short. But also, again, I'm not a big believer, unless it's maybe a sales position where, you're negotiating and that's part of the deal. It's a high-end management position where perhaps you're really talking about a lot of deferred compensation and things like that. Then maybe, that's where you save that. But in normal type positions, especially some of the ones that we're talking about right now, I would say just, be confident, know what's reasonable, know the market, and then approach it that way.
So there's a lot of discussion on social media, particularly LinkedIn, about people not wanting to share salary histories with companies that they're interviewing with. What's your advice? Would you share your salary history if you were in their shoes?
If asked, yes.
There's a lot of conversation in different areas right now in the country of changing that, where companies don't ask anymore, don't request that information. But, you know, I would say if you're asked, yeah, you need to share it. I don't know how you would get around that.
Yeah, it becomes a trust issue.
Yeah.
You have to feel comfortable in the place you're about to accept a job, that they're going to treat you the right way, and that they're not going to.
That's a good point.
They're not going to gauge your offer based on what you're earning, right? It's based on the role you're about to take on, and they've benchmarked it, and you've got to trust that they've done their homework and benchmarked that role and know what the market is, and that if you come in and you say my range is I'm making this, that they're still going to stick with what they have. It doesn't change depending on the candidate. The role is the role, and so therefore that's the right amount to pay. We rarely ask for it, and when we do, there's typically a reason behind it that has nothing to do with the role they're applying for.
I find that there are companies that are scrupulous and ones that aren't. And you've got to feel confident with who you're applying with, who you're going into. And there are companies that base, what you are making and, this is what we're going to be offering you. But that's old school. And I think that more and more organizations are realizing that that is not the way to approach it. But again, I think it comes back to, do you trust the person you're working with? Do you trust the organization and what they're offering? Do you know what you're worth and what your skill set is worth? So regardless of what you're currently making, you could be a recent grad and your last position was minimum wage. Well, obviously, that's not what you're going to be getting paid when you go into this new role. So what do recent grads make in the Nashville market or whatever market you're in? What is the norm? Go to your school and their career center and ask them, talk to them. If you feel confident with what you're asking and what you're worth, then I think that some of that nervousness about sharing what you were making will go away. And that's a tricky one.
Another question that we have, if you feel like you got a denial for a raise was due to discrimination, how would you challenge it?
You'd find another job.
You'd go to HR. But again, sometimes it falls into, is it truly discrimination? And if so, then we need to handle that. And you need to go and you need to share your concerns and express yourself and share why. And we'll look into it in a serious and prompt manner. But if it's just because you're getting a message you don't want to hear, then you need to do some introspective thinking and follow up on that. Why do I feel that way? Is it valid? Is it just my emotions right now? Take a step back. But if you really believe, you come back and you think, yeah, actually, I do believe this is the case for whatever reason, then you need to go to your HR director and talk to them immediately.
I've seen I've been blessed and worked for great organizations, but I have seen most of the time, in fact, all of the time that I've investigated, it wasn't really a discriminatory case. It was a case of not wanting to hear what was being said. It was a case of you could point to other people, same race, same gender, same whatever, that were in fact making more money, and there were reasons for that leader saying no. It's that hard conversation and the way that the leader expressed it. So we're people too, and we make mistakes, and sometimes the way that it was said didn't come off the right way.
Yeah.
Now, are there companies that discriminate? Yes. Is there a possibility that you're working for one of those? Yes. And that was why my first thing was find another job. Right. It's not worth working for someone like that.
Yeah. I think, though, too, I've seen things where it's been it's just a miss. Someone's come to me and said, hey, why is blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah? And you're like, what? What are you even talking about? And then it's a miss. I've had people that haven't been paid. And they were afraid to come forward. And it was, my payroll person was out sick, and there was a person that was doing backup, and they put the check mark there, and everyone assumed that it was taken care of. And then, a month and a half later, someone's like, I can't believe you as a company, you're not paying your employees. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then you find out afterwards and you're like, oh, head slap. I can't believe this happened. Right. And so you rectify it and you change it. But if there's something going on, don't be afraid to raise your hand. Do it professionally. Do it calmly. Have your ducks in a row. But it could be just a simple miss where someone was keyed it in wrong and your pay is messed up. I mean, there's a lot of human touch in things. So, don't automatically approach it as, this person's hates me or this person, whatever. I mean, it could really be a sincere and valid reason.
Or you have the same name as somebody else.
Oh, yeah. I've
they're
seen
going,
that too.
oh, right, look at this.
I've seen that too. Now, as Sigrid Bierman, I've never encountered that personally, but I have seen some names that have had that happen.
Absolutely. So I think we've extended our time here on this conversation and would like to wrap up at this point, but I want to thank both of you for sharing your wisdom with us. And if I could just sum up what I heard from you is that we're all humans, that we all need a little bit of a nudge, right? So working with our line managers and other people at work, that it's up to us to be professional and to do our homework and to really think about our value to the company, and then having an honest conversation about the value that you feel you bring to the company, what your company feels about your value, and then addressing any inconsistencies between the two. And some of that might be in terms of financial rewards, and some of that might just be different responsibilities and skills development, right? Is that a pretty good synopsis of what you said, or part of what you said? So
I think very good.
Yeah. But I appreciate you guys to really help us with this. And for those of you guys listening on social media, I just want a quick reminder on our upcoming events. We've got our next event is a face-to-face event on October 12th at Jackson National. If you have not RSVP'd yet, please go to our website and do that, WomenGetIT.org. Also, please follow us on social media. We're on everything, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Come and join the conversation with us. Our next Facebook Live is in November, on November 14th, same time. It'll be at lunchtime on Tuesday, November 14th. And we want to hear your questions. So today's topic came from you guys. And the next time around, we want to also address your next round of questions. So please let us know in whatever channel you feel most comfortable in. And we'll talk to you then. Thank you.
Thank you.